Hey, Miles.
Is he from Parterre?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Can you hear me?
I can't hear you. Let me see.
Okay.
And I don't think he can see us.
Probably
huh?
my volume. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. I can hear you as well. That's excellent.
Hey, good.
How are you? How are you both?
So far, so good on the technology end. That's always a little bit of a relief, at least to me.
You
I
are
am
in
fine.
such a formal, you're in such a formal room. Are you a town
We're at
office?
town hall in one of the conference rooms on the ground floor.
The
Yeah,
the table isn't as long as Putin's table, though.
yeah. I guess we could move a little closer, but we'll see how it goes and how many people come.
Okay, great. Excellent.
Yeah, Miles, we're expecting most of the committee, the open space committee, and then Zach, head of DPW, and Tony, the town administrator, some interested residents, possibly some people from the Community Preservation Committee as well, who
Oh my goodness.
provided the funds for the project.
Okay,
so-
great. That's
So we'll
excellent.
give, yeah.
No pressure.
Is anyone else
You can speak right up. We're big, well,
concerned about removing on the front hill? And I mean, what's been done now is beautiful,
yeah,
but the rest of the large area
okay. Yes.
is important.
Can you hear what Karen is saying, Miles, or not? No,
Yes, a little bit. The front
Yeah.
hill and it looks good, but there's
Yeah.
other areas, I guess.
yeah, so the open space, I'll do a little intro, Karen, and get you somewhat up to speed on where we are, but the Open Space Committee is interested in the entire Bailey's Hill property. But we
Okay.
started with this section of Fort Ruckman, just to kind of bite off a chunk, use it as a test, try a few things, see what works, what doesn't, and then take it from there.
That's great. I
Yeah.
mean, I feel like you've done a really good job so far. Am I right? I was telling the story earlier to a colleague that is it true that like it was in and around COVID that Zach and the DPW crew went in and essentially did that in-house?
Yes,
I
yeah,
mean, that's pretty incredible.
yeah, I know, kind of mind-blowing, really. They did a really great
Yes.
job. Yeah,
Yeah, I thought I had that story right. And I was like, is that true? Because I mean, honestly, and I'll even go so far as to say this. Like I work with a lot of DPW crews, and many of them do not have that like skill set and or that motivation in order to do
Yeah.
that type of work. So it's pretty impressive.
yeah, it's very impressive. The stabilization of the slope, I think, is very impressive, and just the rock work, building that wall.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah. So I don't know, while we're waiting for people, I don't know, you haven't been there recently, Miles, but the plants, the seeds have come in really well. It's pretty
Great.
lush over there. Yeah,
Oh, excellent. Excellent.
I'm surprised at how good the germination rate is and just how it looks. So
Do you
anyway,
have any images?
no. Well, I do on my phone, but that's not gonna help us.
I mean, if you email them to me right now, I might be, depending on the
Oh.
timing, like I could probably get images. And it's interesting that you say that because I actually just, I was looking at images earlier in the week. And the only images that we have are essentially go back to the dormant time of year, like it was last fall. And I think even the spring before, so I'm sure it's totally changed. And I am interested in seeing it, and I hope that we'll be able to,
The big guns are here. Here, Miles, I'm sending you one photo of Bailey's Hill recently.
Okay.
It's not the best. I'll see what else I have. Hello, thank you very much for coming.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
We'll give people a couple of minutes to come. I heard that people were definitely coming. So I think they're on their way.
So I've been waiting for a long time to meet the famous Zach. And here he is.
Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
Very good.
Oh, all right.
This is Karen Fallett,
Hi.
who's
Hi.
a neighbor at Bailey's Hill.
Oh,
Yes,
good.
and a longtime interested party, I would say, Karen. Do I have that right?
That's right, and I just will show Zach one interesting photo of the DPW Bailey's Hill cleanup crew in 1978 or so. One of these is Jeremy Lowe. All the Lowe boys are there. Daniel, Jeremy, they were before your time at the DPW.
It's amazing that the ocean view is the same structure. Like with all the storms,
Oh, yeah.
and it's just literally.
God awful thing, little better now, huh?
Right, right, but it was like right out of the '70s, like it was like a inside especially,
Yeah,
before he redid it, it was like.
Yeah.
Time.
yeah. I'm
What
sure
else
knows.
you- what else you got? Let's see what you got.
What else you got?
All right, well, there's Bailey's Hill in the entry before the little group of neighbors started in.
So.
That's the just, you know what, some of that fence is still there, that brown wooden fence. That's
It's,
still there.
it's hidden,
And
so-
can you believe those bushes are probably the same bushes that are 10 feet tall?
First start.
those junipers came out of my yard. And now they serve as a barricade
Yeah,
to keep the cars on park. Now they're full of vines.
I know, I've been getting after those vines. I mean, it's
It
tough,
looks like-
but
Yeah, very
The
tough.
space.
I've been weed whacking underneath. Where the vines are.
Yeah.
There's no trees on the road going up.
So here's another,
How much it looks wide open. Jeez.
Like, yeah, those pines, those are probably all planted at the same time too, those pines going.
in 1981, a few of us went to town meeting. We got money to buy those Austrian pines going up the path. They were planted in 81 or 82 or something like that. Plus some bunch of Norway maples and sunburst locust inside the park.
Yeah.
Half of which the kids took down.
Okay, so I believe we have everybody
Hello.
here who we thought was coming today. Maybe a few more will join us by Zoom or in person. But in the interest of respecting everybody's time, I'm gonna call the meeting to order and proceed with our agenda, if that's okay. The main thing for the agenda today, the main item on the agenda is the native planting plan at Bailey's Hill, the Fort Ruckman section. That's really the only item on the agenda. So Miles Connors, the Director of Ecological Services from Parterre, is here with us and will share his screen when we get there and present the plan to us. It's a detailed plan, I think 22 pages or something, Miles, and we've all seen it, or most of us have seen it in the PDF form, but look forward to actually walking through it with you. So today we have Tony Barletta, Town
Hello.
Administrator. You wanted to say who you are?
Yeah, Zach Taylor, DPW Superintendent.
Trish Aldrich, Chair of Open Space.
Karen Fallett, neighbor of the hill.
Nancy Cantomo, open space.
And a few more people by Zoom who I guess will turn on their cameras eventually,
Well, maybe or not.
or not, if they don't want to. But
We
they're
have
with us, which is
two-
great.
two more
Rebecca
members.
Durkin.
2 more members of our
Yeah,
Committee.
Rebecca Durgan from the committee, Paula Devereaux from the committee, and Vi Paddock, interested community member. So.
And donor
basically-
from Swim.
Swim.
Yes, and Representative Nahant Swim, which helped to fund this project. Yay, thank you. Okay, so I say we just dive into it. Does that sound good? Do you want to, yeah, does that sound good, Miles?
Yeah, that sounds great. Can everybody hear me all right?
Yep.
Right,
Excellent.
Okay.
Excellent.
So we'll let Miles do his presentation and then probably save questions and discussion for the end. All right, so I'm not that great at this, but I know other people here are.
If you hit the arrow,
Right here. Share screen.
oh no, okay,
Oh,
good.
he's good.
He's got it.
Huh. How did
I
that
think
happen?
you're, yeah, can everybody see that all right?
yes,
Yes,
And then on the, you scroll, yeah, minimize that on the top left.
okay,
Yeah,
should give you the
Yeah.
mouse, Tony.
There you go.
Oh,
now.
can you see this?
yes.
Yep, we see your screen.
Your screen.
Oh, okay, great. Excellent. All right. Yeah, thank you all for having me this afternoon. It was a privilege to put together this plan for the, for members of the committee and also for, DPW and the town at large. This is an open space in a natural area, along a coastal bank and an upland community and a historical park. And it's a real, it's a great privilege to be involved in a project like this. So my name is Miles Connors. I'm the director of Parterre Ecological. We're currently based out of Billerica, Massachusetts, and myself and a small team of about 15 are involved in specifically doing invasive plant management and native restoration projects. So on any given day, you can find us, working on like building meadows or, removing invasives from wetland edges, working with clients that involve residential, commercial endeavors to work on invasive plant management or native restoration projects. So we integrate principles of ecology and horticulture to protect, promote, and restore native plant communities. We plan, implement, and maintain a wide range of restoration projects in the greater Boston area. As I was saying, our primary focus is on invasive plant management and native restoration techniques. We like to think that we produce resilient solutions that protect open space conservation, promote native plant species, and restore diverse native plant communities in different environments. As I mentioned, we have about a team of around 15 or so. We grow every year. We've hired 3 people this year. There's a pretty big interest in this type of work, whether you're on a residential scale or you're looking at open space like we are today. So Bailey's Hill Park, we're specifically going to go through and start looking at the plan that we put together for the park. In particular, looking at Fort Ruckman, the East Slope restoration, which I will say I was very impressed just with Zach and the DPW and their ability to go in and essentially take on a project like this. I expressed this to Zach when we initially met on site. Like, we work actually a great deal with different DPWs doing this work, and I was really impressed with the grading, the stone wall building, the slope stabilization, and also like the seating. It's great work that's been started there, and we hope that this plan enables you all to kind of push forward and look forward on like continued invasive plant management and also native planting methods for the overall site. Unfortunately, fortunately or not, I guess, I mean, the images that I have right now are pretty much all taken during the dormant time of year. Trish was telling me there is one image in here that I'll show that she just emailed over to me that does have some greening that's been happening over the course of the year. I really look forward to ideally getting back to the site and seeing, what is ultimately coming in. But I think also like it's really nice to be able to see what we would call like more of the bones of the landscape, you know, really looking at the grading and the overall specifics of the site without vegetation. So that's what, you know, a lot of these images that you'll see today. So, and this is one of the images that that actually Trish just sent me, and I was interested in this because, you know, what you can see here is that it's obviously DPW is in there on a regular basis. They're cutting back a lot of the invasive shrubs along the edges of the forest, and they're also mowing the lawn on a regular basis. But you also start to see a lot of Japanese knotweed sprouts that are starting to come in to you know, into certain areas. When we initially visited the site, it was just told that it was really just a Japanese knotweed patch among other invasive species. There's a lot of black locust that, although a native plant, is on the invasive list in Massachusetts, that the black locusts surround the site as the massed like tree species on the edge. There's a lot of multiflora rose and buckthorn, Japanese knotweed, bittersweet, among other species. So we'll talk a little bit about, you know, Japanese knotweed management as well as we kind of get into the project, but it's obvious that this has been mown like probably over the course of the season. And, you know, as we move into September is really late August, early September is an appropriate time for treatment as the plant would come into flower. So we're looking at, I have, basically I took the plan and I broke it up into individual images so that we could go over it together. So again, this is a plan for native restoration and a guide to invasive management at Bailey's Hill Park. And we looked at this area, this newly cleared area that we were asked by the committee to look at an introduction of a new planting plan. The DPW had gone in and essentially regraded, cleared, done a lot of invasive management and stabilization, and then seeded all areas. So we came in on top of that and looked at like, well, what type of tree species, shrub species, and other perennial species could be introduced to the existing area to enhance its like ecological value in terms of like native species on a coastal bank for a lot of migrating birds, other pollinator species, but also some goals that were associated with like maintaining views from certain elevations and also for stabilization. So we initially go in, we looked at a lot of the maps that were available to us. We also happened to fly a drone. Some of these images are actually just taken off of that graphic of us having a drone in the sky and then just outlining areas that that are open. You can see down here from the base of the slope, it's all open lawn up through this area. Can you see my cursor?
Yep.
So up through this area as you go up to the top of the slope here. You have this is that steep slope that was stabilized and a lot of rock embankment. There's a rubble wall retaining down here, a stone wall here, and other riprap areas in this location as well. And this footprint, you know, we're estimating based upon like GIS has a footprint that's, you know, just slightly over a half an acre, you know, and as I mentioned, thoughtfully graded with retaining walls on 3 points along the slope and really with some great stabilization measures that are already in place. So the planting plan takes into account both the aesthetic objective of the project, some of the cost limitations, but also the goals of creating biodiversity on site. You know, the trees and shrubs have a great visual impact, but can be expensive to procure and to install, especially on the steep slope, areas that are already stabilized, areas that have already been seeded. We really look to bring in plants that could either be brought in as like a 2-inch plug wildflower, or things that could be moved up the hill by at most a ball cart. So it'd be like a no machine entry into the area. So the bulk of the planting is herbaceous, although we do have woody trees and shrubs involved. So to start with planting, the planting plan, we have trees and shrubs. So this beachhead or coastal bank area down along the base of the slope. So if you're familiar with that, this is just along that pathway as you walk past and can look up at this entrance. So this is right along the edge of the coastal bank. When we were on site, it's obvious that during storm events, like this is very much a washed out area. It is a early successional area where you will get tide and surf that will wash up. There were stones, there was seaweed. It was definitely certainly part of the coastal bank. So we really look for those species that do well in that coastal bank environment. And those include things like if you look here, just a little maybe an orientation here as you look at something like RV, over here you have this abbreviation and you have Rosa virginiana. So we have 13 of those, and that's a Virginia rose. Great coastal plant, native plant species to Massachusetts. And we have it mixed with Myrica pennsylvanica, right, which is our native bayberry. Very common plant that you'll find out in other parts of Bailey's Park, growing in rock crevices and out on really exposed areas. The bayberry is a great coastal bank stabilization plant. So there's groupings of shrubs down here that includes Rosa virginiana and the Myrica pennsylvanica. Also mixed in here, we also have beach plum. So this is the Prunus maritima. So we have a grouping of 5 of those, again, with Myrica pennsylvanica. And you notice that these are repeating, right? We have Rosa virginiana, and we have the rose, and we have bayberry, etc. And we have them in groups. The idea is that if we had them in groups and they weren't spread out, it would allow people to come in and essentially maintain this a little bit better, like mow it occasionally, do invasive plant management. There's still a pretty high pressure through here of Japanese knotweed. So by putting them in groups, it allows them to just be more condensed in that area for maintenance purposes. And certainly this could be replicated out in years to come. Like this is more of a palette of plants that could be replicated out. So we have those shrubs predominantly down here. We'll talk about a seed mix that we recommend underneath later. As we move up the hill, our thoughts were, you kind of have this opening here, which is pretty dry, get some morning sun, but predominantly it's shade, right? And so in this area, like at the base of this stone wall that was built, really looking at species that would do well in kind of that dry shade. So we're recommending sweet fern, which is Comptonia peregrina. In mass in that particular area, we have a total of 8 of those in this particular area. You see that we have sizes over here. So that's in a 1 gallon plant. And then we have the VA, which happens to be, it's actually, is it not on here? It doesn't seem to be
Maple
on.
leaf viburnum.
Yes, thank you. It's a maple leaf viburnum. You guys are all ahead of me. And then oak leaf hydrangea here as well. So that's like a little planting that's just basically at the foot of that little retaining wall. Up here,
You have it as VP in the.
we do. We have it as VP. You're absolutely right. So that's a typo.
Yeah.
In this open lawn area up here, we recommended a sassafras, which I think would be a great plant for coastal bank. I suspect that you probably have sassafras naturally, like at Bailey's. I see it a lot in coastal bank projects. And just as more of a specimen, it is the largest plant. We currently have it as a 2-inch caliper. you know, but I also get this a lot as even in like a 5-gallon conservation grade plant. So you could certainly, doesn't need to be a 2-inch caliper, but just thinking about it as like a specimen plant that would grow, have interesting fall color, provide habitat value, but also a destination. Like it might be also with this viewpoint from above the wall, there might ultimately be a bench, chairs, something in this location underneath the shade of the sassafras tree.
How tall does
above-
that get?
What's that?
How tall will that get?
Sassafras can actually end up being like a fairly large tree. It can be anywhere between, 40 feet or so, 40, 50 feet. And then we have up above this wall, again, another dry location similar to down below here, just starting to take up some of that edge effect, like below those black locust trees along the edge, looking at Deer Villa, which is a dwarf bush honeysuckle. It really gets fairly large shrub, can get to be 3-4 feet wide by around 6 feet tall. So really starting to take up some mass there, and mix that in with American hazelnut, which again does well with a little bit of sun, dappled shade in those dry conditions. And then we have 3 other Myrica up here on the far upper side of that bank, in an area which is very dry right now, has very little, vegetation. And this is essentially, what would this be called? Like, was this like a gunnery? Would that be a term for this infrastructure?
Yeah.
Is that the battery or?
The battery,
That.
right? So this is at the very top of that bank, this concrete battery that's here as well. So those are some of the trees and shrubs that we were talking about. And this is, these are images of some of the plant species. So this is as we move into fall color with the sassafras. Here's a mature plant at probably, 40 feet or so tall. We have beach plum flowering in the springtime, usually flowers around the early spring, around the time that we might associate with serviceberry and other flowering plants in the spring. And then this time of year really starts to develop fruit, which can be harvested certainly by birds, but also an edible by people if you're willing. Virginia rose, like really like having that kind of like that alternative to Rosa rugosa, which we're so familiar with as a beach rose. But this is the native alternative to that, and also actually has some red fall color to it. The bayberry, again, is like a semi-evergreen, depends on the winter. Certainly has that like evergreen-like feel to it. But then in the wintertime also has that fruit, which has that berry, which is also edible by birds. And then we have nannyberry, or the viburnum acerifolium at the bottom here. So, and this is just showing that area where we were considering the kind of open area where you may consider a sassafras, and this is that lower planting, that shrub planting along this lower edge with shrubs along this back edge here and shrubs along this back edge here above the riprap. And this just kind of felt like a really nice landing pad, right? Like you come up the hill and you have this nice level, like open area where you might consider putting a bench or a couple of Adirondacks or something that might be a destination for people who are in the park. There's more images of some of the other species that are found in the document. Like we have the sweet fern here, the Comptonia, the American hazelnut, this fragrant sumac, the bush honeysuckle actually in flower here. Really interesting plant. I mean, it is a native. It's not as common as some other plants that we've looked at in our native forests. It's pretty particular about where it actually naturally lives, but does very well in the landscape. I have many clients that enjoy this plant a great deal. It flowers, has these like yellow flowers with this green red foliage, and it turns red in the fall. Disease resistant, Really just a nice solid shrub for, you know, even like a front entry or an edge anywhere it might be. Fothergilla, probably many of us are familiar with Fothergilla, or also known as witch alder. And then oak leaf hydrangea, another fairly common native garden plant that we find that can also have some interesting fall color as well. Any questions about the trees or shrubs?
No,
Yes, I have a question. This is Vi. So I have quite a lot of sweet fern out back in my property. And the rabbits destroyed about a quarter of it. They took the bark off it in the winter. And then in the thicket, in the Nahant thicket, a major proportion of roses, I'm not sure which ones, were completely destroyed by the rabbits.
Hmm.
And I don't know what, I mean, I wouldn't have thought the rabbits would be interested in sweet fern, but they were eating the bark. So, and now they're, as the new sprouts are coming up, and the sweet ferns that are going well, they're spreading, but every now and then they'll take a bite. So my question is, since it seems that the rabbits in the hunt, you know, they eat one thing on one person's property and another thing on another person's property, can you predict what's going to get eaten, or are you just going to put some wire around them, particularly the trees? Entire trees had their bark shredded all the way around and killed them in the Nahant thicket last winter because of the bark eating.
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, browsing is certainly an issue. With some of these plants, I would say that sweet fern, it is sweet, right, in its fragrance, and I have seen some browsing that takes place on sweet fern. Typically, in my observation, it has been when it is initially planted, and not when it's established, like a couple years in.
Mine's
And
about
I-
5 years old, 5 or 6 years old.
Oh, 5 or 6 years old, and it's still
Yeah.
being browsed.
Oh yeah, they shredded the bark off of it.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, I mean, we don't have that, you know, really often happen with sweet ferns. So some of these is just like, it depends on the winter, the severity of the winter, what's exposed, what isn't, maybe even like the local rabbit population, if I could go that far. You know, it is, and certainly when you're talking about rabbits, you're also speaking of deer as well as major like contributors to, you know, what our native flora and fauna have, you know, developed over time. But yeah, I certainly maybe would recommend, you know, some sort of like caging. Sweet fern as a plant is colonal, so it will colonize. So actually, if it's well established, some of that browsing may actually create a denser, more established plant over time. You know, again, sight unseen, I'm not sure if that's occurring or not, but that's an interesting comment on sweet fern. So native restoration techniques, planting trees, you know, we're looking at, really the sassafras is really the only one that we're looking to do. But I think in these documents, we typically like to include document in terms of like, you know, how best to go about, you know, planting a tree. We've been on many sites where, you know, trees have been left in cages, or the root flare have been buried. So it's like, we like to include this in our documents just to assist with establishment. You know, so we're looking to dig a planting hole about twice as wide as a root ball. Typically that planting hole is tapered. It's not a direct cut, twice as wide, it's tapered down in, you know, and you're looking to also untie the twine, the burlap, get rid of the wire cage. You know, once a trunk flare has been located, and the trunk flare can actually be buried in the container, or it can be buried in the burlap sack. So, you know, when they dig the tree, oftentimes the soil will actually, you know, kind of come up around the base of the tree. So you really want to look for where the flare or the base of the tree, you know, flares out as it comes to the ground. And oftentimes you do have to remove some soil in order to find that. We've been on sites where the base of trees can be 3 to 5 years old, and they've established fairly well for a couple years, and then they really start to turn and go in a different direction and deteriorate. You know, you start to see some collar rot where the bark will start to rot out. You might find some insect damage along the base of the tree, and ultimately the entire tree starts to decline. So using wire cutters, or even most recently, might be more of a DPW recommendation, might be already happening, but we've been using angle grinders, like battery operated angle grinders, to just rip through the burlap and the wire cage. It just goes a lot quicker than using wire snips. And removing any twine, wire caging, and burlap from the root ball as to allow unimpeded growth into the surrounding soil. We're looking to use a soil knife or pick to kind of work away at any work on from the sides, using native soil to backfill around the tree, using some of the soil that was removed from the planting hole from the soil around the base of the root ball, so that the tree is vertical and adequately supported. And then continue adding soil and water in, obviously, to avoid air pockets. So, and then shrubs, similar situation, but the thing that we find a lot actually with shrubs, you can see in this upper left-hand corner, is actually the roots tend to just move in and around the pot. So when we're planting, we really tend to break up that root ball a great deal before we're planting. So then we move into the herbaceous section. So just for some orientation, this is the lower coastal bank, and you can see some of these shrub areas that were removed. So these are the areas of the bayberry and the wild rose and beach plum. And then as you move above this riprap kind of rubble wall area, this is that steep slope that comes down, that was seeded as well and reinforced. And then, up along this edge here, we also have a perennial layer in these certain areas that are currently unplanted. So maybe just to start down here, we have on the coastal bank, this is the SM1. So you can go over here to this suite, and this SM1 is actually New England wetland plants, salt tolerant grass mix. And we'll look at that as a species, but essentially it includes things like little blue stem, panicum grass, fescue, and other species that are straight coastal bank, native grass species. They would be interspersed and seeded underneath these species of shrubs. I do suspect by this point in the season that that there's a lot of vegetation that's already just naturally coming in there. It could be wrong, but typically early successional things, certainly Japanese knotweed, crabgrass, other, you might get lucky and get some native beach grasses and things like that that are starting to come in. But hopefully in some of those bare areas, that's a seed mix that we would recommend. As you come up onto this steeper slope, we have PS1. So as you look at PS1, we're really looking to start, that has started to actually come in. And I believe that was a conservation mix from New England wetland plants that was used on that bank, if I remember correctly. And so what we're proposing in this particular area is the addition of straight native wildflowers. So upwards of 500 Asclepias tuberosa, which is our butterfly milkweed, as plugs. And those are 2-inch plugs. So you'd be looking at essentially 10 flats of 50, small 2-inch plugs going along the bank, and with a soil knife, just installing those plugs. We also have 250 Baptisia australis, and that's the blue false indigo, as 2-quart pots. I feel like those do better as a container plant. You try to grow from seed, you're looking at 3 to 5 years before it flowers. As a 2-inch plug, you're maybe looking at 2 to 3 years before it flowers. So when we're doing meadows with Baptisia, we often use a 2-quart to 1-gallon plant. And then for fall flower, we're suggesting around 450 of Aster spectabilis, which is the eastern showy aster, also as a plug. In the PS2 area, those are, that is again, more of dry area at the base of the slope, get some morning sun, little afternoon shade. So the PS2, we're looking at Pennsylvania sedge, crested iris, heuchera or alum root, and then also aster, which is a whitewood aster, as like the predominant kind of like ground cover. And those are all plugs as well as 2-quart pots. And then we move up to PS3, which is the Monarda punctata, which is a native Monarda, great pollinator plant, as well as some penstemon and some bluewood aster, and that I'm sorry, and also some eastern columbine in this upper ridge of this path. There's a bank here and a bank here as well. This bank here, this PS1, we're requesting like the eastern showy aster as well as blazing star, Liatris. So those are some of the planting methods. I do have also these sheets associated with some of the plantings that we're suggesting. Happy to answer any questions that you might have about, any of these species. I mean, maybe just to touch upon the rabbit question or deer question. I would say maybe the only plant in question might be the showy aster, although you're looking at such a steep bank with other existing vegetation that's already starting to come in, a lot of native grasses, maybe some black-eyed Susans that have started to come in on that bank this spring, that, the showy aster would just kind of blend in so much that it may not be an issue. Any other questions about the perennials on the bank and the upper areas?
So once you put all these plants in, how do they have to be maintained? Like watering and stuff like that?
Yeah, it's a great question. So when we're working in more natural areas such as this, in areas that you don't have, irrigation readily available to you, we typically plant, I would wait until fall. I would really, and our original proposal that Trish and other members had requested had invasive plant management visits, I think a total of 3 over the course of this season, and then coming in and doing a fall planting. So I would, at this point, and it could even be early next spring, if you wanted to get into, if there were like fiscal year responsibilities and things of that nature, you could get into next spring. But certainly like in either the fall or spring is what I would recommend for planting in an area without irrigation. This year it would be great. I mean, you could almost have planted last week and have things, kind of root down and establish fairly well. But, if we had planted in the spring of last year, we probably would have had, an incredible amount of dieback, if not, death in plant species because of the drought we had. So, and this is just another image of that slope, I'm sure, and this is the lower coastal bank here as well. Like, I'm sure it looks a lot different, but one of the things now that I imagine that you have a lot of like, grasses, certainly some of the early, I'm trying to think of like the perennial rise and annual rise is like cover crops that are coming up on that steep slope. Hopefully you're starting to see some Rebecca or black-eyed Susan that's starting to flower, but most likely there's also some annual and perennial weeds, right? Like you might have mugwort coming in, or you may have Japanese knotweed coming in. You can see this is a little stand here of Japanese knotweed in the lower right-hand corner. I suspect a lot of that knotweed is starting to show up in different areas of this lower bank. And so the idea is that you're going out onto that bank and you're essentially plugging in native wildflowers into an existing meadow, like something that was seeded that has germinated, and you're just adding biodiversity to that existing space.
Well, what's,
And this is just another image of some some of those plugs that we talked about for that steeper slope. So you have, this is butterfly milkweed that's about ready to flower. This is liatris that is in flower, and also Baptisia australis, the blue indigo. So, planting plugs, we often use in a situation like this on a steeper slope. You may want to get in and just use like a soil knife or a trowel for that matter with volunteers. But we'll do large areas that, for meadows and things like that. This lower image here happens to be at Mount Auburn Cemetery, where we did about 17,000 square feet, right? So it was close to a half an acre of meadow plugs and then seeding in a combination. And so we actually went in with battery powered augers, like they were essentially augers on a drill, battery powered operated drill, and just, drilled into the existing soil and just followed up with planting in behind. A few notes on plugs, like when you're dealing with that much, say you receive at the DPW as an example, they obviously want to be unpacked right away. You want to unload them. You want to keep them in shade, keep them well watered. At our nursery, our plant buyer and the person who also takes care of our nursery hates plugs. She wants them to come in and get out as soon as possible because they typically need to be watered like 2 or 3 times a day. So like at the time that you order them and maybe receive them within a week's time, you probably want to gear it towards like a planting day, right? By either the contractor or by volunteers. Just because they're grown to be like bumped up into containers or installed directly into the ground, not to be like hanging out inside their plastic pots. So they should be kept moist at all times, water thoroughly 2 or 3 times a day. Determine the spacing, which we did with a general spacing on that map and the quantities that are there. I think we were looking at 12 to 18 inches on center in that steep bank area. Planting holes can be dug with a variety of tools. I would highly recommend the battery powered auger. I mean, it just saves time and also your risks over several hundred plugs that might be going in the ground. And then again, planting perennial grasses, this is larger containers. But you can see we typically come in and we pre-dig holes. We then drop containers into the hole, and then we follow up with planting afterwards. When we pop a plant out, similar to the shrubs that are grown in containers, we often find that they're pop bound. So we'll scarify them with either our hands or a soil knife, before we put them into the ground. Seeding disturbed soils, very complicated. Each site, it might be a little bit different. Seed mixtures are always different. Existing conditions and time of year are always different for certainly for projects. One of the things that we like to do is make sure we reduce the existing vegetation on site. You can't go in and seed a lawn. You can't go in and seed over an existing meadow very successfully. That's why we're recommending plants on that steep bank. So what we recommend is that you really try to limit the existing vegetation over the course of the season. So that could be a matter of like mowing, like to strip vegetation, like really dropping a blade really low and starving that plant over the course of the year. It could involve hand weeding and grubbing, and that could be including mechanical means. Or it could involve using herbicide use and essentially going in and doing a foliar application to kill off the existing vegetation before you're reintroducing a new plant community. And that plant community happens to be this herbaceous layer in the seed mix. We work a lot with different seed mixes, certainly from from New England wetland plants, from Prairie Moon Nursery, from Ernst Conservation Seeds in Pennsylvania. But we've also found in recent years, we've actually started to custom mix species based upon the square footage and percentages and what you're looking to achieve in the area. Because I have found over time, a lot of these mixes will inadvertently revert back to kind of the bullies in the family, if you will. Like it could be the first year, it's like, oh my gosh, that's all Rebecca, black-eyed Susans. And then as you go into to future years, the panicum grass tends, or the switchgrass tends to be the predominant plant species. So what starts out at something that could be like a small percent of the mix ends up being a huge part of the overall seed mix. So meadows, I often tell people that seeding meadows in particular are complicated. Meadows are complicated as they should be. They're highly diverse. They tend to succeed very quickly. And you have to kind of be on top of knowing like what is in the mix and, you know, what you're ultimately trying to achieve in that particular location. This is a mix of that coastal bank. So that lower coastal bank, we have, this is the Canada wild rye. So that is a cover crop, if you will, that's mixed in. Canada wild rye is semi-perennial, so it will stay and help reinforce the bank. Big blue stem. Some of these will also be in that conservation. Many of these are actually in that conservation mix too, which I think was used on the upper hillside. Big blue stem, andropogon, beautiful plant. Different switch grasses or panic grasses that are on that in the seed mix. Red fescue, which sits tighter to the ground. It's a bunch grass. You often find fescue varieties in turf grass mixes. Pathrush, we find a lot in woodland areas where there's a lot of travel and compaction on trails. Like I recommend pathrush actually on trails a great deal that you're trying to vegetate and other vegetation doesn't work. Pathrush seems to be, tends to be like, 3 to 6 inches tall at most, has a semi-evergreen feel to it, has a little flower, and deals greatly well with foot traffic. Panicum grass, again, switchgrass, and then Indian grass in here. This is the seed mix here that I took directly off the website just for reference. You can really look at, it's upland and facultative. It's a dry condition. There's some light kind of references here on how best to apply. You do want to apply lightly to disturbed soils. You can't just throw this on the ground and compacted soils. You have to work it into the soil. Although a lot of these grasses just do want to sit roughly on top of the surface. It's a light disturbance, an application, and then a raking in. Honestly, similar to what you would do with turf lawn. So again, this is that area when we were initially looking at it. I'm sure it looks a lot different now. You can
say Miles, if I can interrupt for
Sure.
a second, I just emailed you a few more recent photos, and one of them looks like it was taken in from this exact same spot.
Okay,
So
great.
if you're interested, you've got some more recent ones
Yeah, great, excellent.
showing how much it's greened up.
Yeah, absolutely. So, let's see if I can. I don't know if this will climb over here or not. If all of you can see that.
Yeah.
So this is kind of that hillside now. So it doesn't look like you actually have a lot of Rebecca that's coming into that right now, but certainly there's a lot of vegetation and it's being mowed on that lower hillside. So that's great. That's excellent that's taking place. So invasive plant management techniques. You know, I feel, so we have manual methods here. This is something that we like to include. Just generally in our practices, I feel like Zach and the DPW crew have this solely under control. Like they're able to identify a lot of these invasive plant species in and around the area. They've been cutting them back. I'm not sure how much application is happening, but I do think as a next step, you would probably really want to invest in an applicator that could come in and assist you with cut and dab herbicide application, but also with application toward herbicide towards some of the Japanese knotweed management. I know that in many social circles, including my own, herbicide use is a sensitive topic. That's why in the plan, we really speak to the idea of, the people who are doing the work are qualified, they're herbicide applicators, that you're applying herbicide at the appropriate time of year to control the plant, but also really looking at, the right products, in order to do that. So manual methods may not pertain as much, but it's really just about like loppers, identifying and using loppers, hand cutters, saws, Felcos, etc., to come in, identify, cut, grub, pull, remove invasive plant species. We also use mechanical methods where we have a brush mower, but certainly we use a combi system like brush mowers, like hedge trimmers, as well as open like saw blades and chainsaws to come in and just like cut and drop understories of invasive plant species. When it comes to herbicide application, this particular location, I would say you're looking at doing a cut and dab herbicide application. You're making a fresh cut to things like multiflora rose, buckthorn, bittersweet, and you can dab using what we use is a buckthorn blaster. If you even Google buckthorn blaster, they typically come up. It's a little reservoir, has a tip, like a cloth tip at the end. It's got a screw off cap. We essentially will do a 50-50 mix with an addition of blue dye. So we can see where we have applied herbicide. We can, when you use that blue dye, you can also see if you have any contact yourself, whether on your pants, your skin, other clothing. So it's a good safety precaution, both for the natural environment and also for the applicator. But you can see that we've applied around the base of this large buckthorn plant here. So that would be a cut and dab herbicide application using a buckthorn blaster. Foam application. This is something that we've recently started in the past, like 2 to 3 years. We've really used this to apply to directly to herbaceous stems, particularly with Japanese knotweed. You can see here, there's a foaming agent that's brought in with the blue dye and the herbicide. It's just a hand pump and a trigger, and it creates this little small dollop of agent of herbicide that's on the leaf that over time, when it reaches air, it diffuses out onto the leaf. Now, when you're applying directly to a leaf, that herbicide is more effectively translocated through the vascular system of the plant. I know that makes me, sound really smart, but it's not. It's a simple action. Like if you're applying directly to the stump, that's the only surface area that's applied, right? Is just to that small area, right? And when it's taken into a larger root system, you're going to end up with a lot of resprouting when this takes place. Versus when it's translocated through the plant itself and through all of the tissue, it kills off a lot more of the plant. So you can see here, we can also go through and we can actually apply to even some of these smaller stems. I have a slide a little bit further along. We're close to the end, but also with Japanese knotweed, just as a general statement, we typically go in with a stand that has not been managed. We cut it down in and around Memorial Day to the ground. And then we'll go back in and around Labor Day. So late August, early September, typically that's when this picture would have been taken as the plant comes into flower. And we'll do the application then. We found that that's most effective. The cutting in spring and around Memorial does two things. Reduces the height of the plant for easier accessible application, but it also forces the plant to push new growth, which takes reserves out of the root system, you know, and really wears the plant out. Basil bark treatment, we added this for any of the like tree of heaven that you have on site, also the black locust. This is the basil bark treatment is a pretty simple and effective way of killing, you know, larger vegetation pretty quick. It is an oil that is inside with an herbicide and is essentially sprayed around the basal bark of the plant. So we'll use this a lot with tree of heaven, Norway maples, black locusts, other larger plants, even some plants that we're looking to create like snag habitats with. So maybe some of the areas around here you could use a basil bark treatment to apply that ring of herbicide around the plant. I would caution to obviously think about safety when it comes to a tree that's now all of a sudden dead and has deteriorating limbs above somebody's head. You know, we will again often kind of come in with an arborist and cut back and remove and stump down to something that creates more of like a snag habitat, which would be very beneficial in a coastal area like this for some of those predatory birds that you might have and do have. So, and then obviously removing and disposing of a lot of that plant material off-site. We have bittersweet, finally, that's managed, and just a graphic speaking towards the idea that we are cutting and dabbing at the base of the plant, and typically then at shoulder to head height, and then allowing these plants to deteriorate over time and shake themselves out of trees. This is another sheet on Japanese knotweed management, just speaking about the idea of like cutting in the spring, coming back and doing application in the fall. You know, if we have a management project of a stand that comes along this time of year, which we often do, typically in the fall, we will go in and we'll cut the plant and then apply a herbicide to the hollow stem, indirectly to the hollow stem. That's also quite effective. We often call it like a hack and squirt or cut and squirt. When we started Japanese knotweed management as well, we would typically want to carry that knotweed off site. We would have a heck of a time trying to find a landfill with good reason that would want to take the Japanese knotweed. We went so far as to bring the knotweed to Zoo New England and other farms if it hadn't been treated in the past. But most recently, we have actually started to just like cut and leave the Japanese knotweed on site. We've been working with the Dedham DPW for like a number of years, eradicating knotweed in the town and just like cutting and dropping right at the location that we're cutting. And what we have found is that knotweed is, if you can imagine what the herbaceous species looks like in the wintertime, just those tall, dead herbaceous canes, like that, they just dry out and they die. We really have not had any secondary resprouting from any of those plants. I typically tell my crew, whether or not it's appropriate or not, like butts up, where like we take the hollow stem and we just make sure that it is able to flue or dry out, like with the hollow stem up. We were not going to leave the Japanese knotweed in a damp, like highly organic soil where a lot of those nodes would just start to resprout into the soil. We're really looking to keep the knotweed piles in an upland location where they would just dry out on site. So then you're not transporting, you're not moving the plant around, you're isolating it to the location where you're going to come back in subsequent seasons and do management strategy. And then finally, we have a management calendar for a lot of this work. You know, we're looking at, you know, there's a question earlier about, you know, times of year to plant. Well, you know, if plants are available in March, it's it's great, but they're typically dormant. And so, we have done some planting in March, but we really move into April, May, and even sometimes into June. Usually by June 15th, we cut off. And then September, well, September can be really hot at the beginning of the month, but as we move into late September, early October, and even into November, we typically do restoration planting. Hand removal, we love to get into areas into the dormant time of year when you don't have a lot of herbaceous species kind of covering things up. You can really see the bones of the landscape. So we do a lot of cutting and removal over the course of the winter when things are a little bit slower, and then come in and do treatments, later in the season as well. So hand pulling herbaceous species can also be done, in through March and early spring, really any time of year. And then cut and dab herbicide application, I would say, it's most effective as you get into the warmer parts of the year and in through the fall months. Knotweed stands, we talked about cutting tall stands in May, like late May, early June, and then coming back in early, August into early September to do the treatment methods as well. So this is just a calendar. I mean, as you can see, there's really something to do at all times of the year when it comes to stewarding and maintaining a site like this. But we were really looking to design a plan that would, enable you all to continue with invasive plant management over the course of the year, and then move into planting at the appropriate time of year. And that planting would be a combination of seeding, planting herbaceous species, and small, more conservation grade plants that would be more obtainable and accessible for the steep slope. So thank you all for listening. I hope it was helpful.
I have a question. This is
Sure.
Vi. Nahant is seeing a surging of black swallowwort, which seems to be almost impossible to pull out. So I'm wondering if you could show pictures at some point so people, it's pretty new to Nahant, but I'm finding it everywhere now. The birds, I think, are dropping the seeds at quite a rate. Tell us about that. Teach us.
Sure. Yeah. So black swallowwort, I'm just pulling up an image of it. I'm hoping that, let me see if I can just screen share this screen. So this is just images of black swallowwort. It actually is starting to look like this right now. It's starting to form pods.
Yeah,
Plan that he sent us.
what he just went through today.
No,
We have a copy of the plan. It's mostly what it's
yes,
talking
it's
about.
very similar.
Plans, yeah.
It's a very tough plant to manage manually. You can mow it if it's in meadows. It will, even when it's cut, it will push new growth and try to seed through the course of the season. We have many conservation lands, and this gets into the herbicide questions. Many conservation lands and open meadows and stuff where we're specifically managing black swallowwort. And it is effective to use a triclopyr-based herbicide. So it's something that the DPW may be familiar with, like products like Garlon or Brush Begone. It's a broadleaf vegetation killer. And so it will not affect native grasses, whereas something like glyphosate or our Roundup products, which are all vegetation killers, would kill anything it comes in contact with. The triclopyr based product or the Garlon products are effective in managing black swallowwort, and it is certainly an invasive that is worth noting, and I would highly recommend managing. You can see that when it really starts to take hold, it will come into meadow environments such as this and really start to become the predominant plant. It's a vine, so you can also find areas where it will start to climb in and through and up through shrubs and other species as well. It's also in the family of Asclepias or milkweeds. So there is some conversation around the idea that monarchs are attracted to laying eggs on black swallowwort, and then the larva hatches, and the larva is not able to eat the plant. So there's some research out there right now around the idea of like that larva having to move to ideally a neighboring milkweed plant, and whether or not, how much this is happening or not in the natural environment. But it is in the milkweed family distantly, and there's some research going on about monarch caterpillars actually laying their eggs on this species, if they didn't need other difficulties in their existence. In the early spring, you do see this black flower, which is actually which is also a good, very small. It's a very small flower, but.
So Miles, this is
Yeah.
Trish. I'd like to thank you again for developing this plan for Bailey's Hill. It's incredibly
Absolutely.
thorough, detailed, helpful, all that stuff. So, and thank you also for walking it through us today, so we can just have a much better understanding of it. So that's awesome. By the way, he is walking us through it today and spending this time with us at no additional charge to us. So that's great too. Thank you very much.
Mhm.
So I guess I'm curious in particular what, Zach, if you have thoughts or questions.
Honestly, I think the plan is great. I think there'll be some tweaks, once you see the
Yeah.
site. I mean, it's evolving now. We were super lucky with the spring. Weather-wise, I was a little bit nervous about the grass, but I'm mowing it once a week now. Trimming once a week, so we're just maintaining right now, leaving the slope. We're hand pulling weeds off the slope, the larger slopes. So I think the plan's great. I'll give you a call early next week, and we'll start to talk about how we're gonna work this contract and what we need to do in terms of procurement. Because I know you work for other cities and towns, and there are some procurement laws that we need to follow in terms of how we do the hiring.
Yep.
But you put a number on the plan as it stands, as terms of, or is that something that you need to look at again in terms of putting together a quote? For the
Yeah,
work?
that's a good question. I think we did that in the early spring. Honestly, I think that price would certainly hold, but we could also tweak it. Like, as an example, we weren't sure like how well it was being maintained. Like, maybe you don't need 3 invasive plant management visits. Maybe it's like, maybe it's 1 or 2.
I think the way you have the plan, sorry to interrupt, but I think the way you have the plan is perfect.
Yeah.
But I just think like that's how we'll build the quote, is based on exactly how it is. And then once we get under contract, we'll take another look at the site, and then maybe things that we eliminate and things that we add.
Yep.
Just based on what you've seen. But we'll price it based on installing all those plants, where they are, how you had it. And then once we get to the site, you may eliminate some of the seeding, but that's really all I see in terms of what you would eliminate. I mean, I like the plugs on the slope and the one tree. I think, like I said, I think it's a good plan. I think we need to talk about pricing now.
Yeah, so you actually prepared the proposal in January, Miles, so it has been a while and things have.
That's what I mean. I think
Yeah,
I'll call you next week and we can talk about what I need to do for procurement. And then I'll give you a chance to put together a quote. I mean, obviously, the most desirable company that we want to get the job, but like I said, there's just certain loopholes I need to get through.
Yep.
In order to do that.
So
Yeah,
when
no,
the-
understand.
When the plan was originally drawn up, and this was January, it also included like that they would do the procurement and the planting. Is that something we still wanna?
100%.
Okay.
So it would basically be, the quote would be for purchase and install according to the plan prepared by you on such and such date.
Yeah.
okay.
Great.
Like I said, I'll call you. We can talk details. I can provide you some pictures, but we can talk details next week if that works with you.
Yeah, no, that sounds great. I'd be really excited to, move forward on this and whatever capacity you all would like to, like to see it. So like if it's a invasive plant visit, if it's, planting, like I could even look at it again and make sure that we, tighten up numbers or, kind of break it out into phases, whatever needs to get done, but happy to provide, any updated proposals for you.
Yeah, that's an option. Like I said, we can talk through, I can talk to Tony too about. I need to actually study up a little bit more on my procurement, but we can talk to you about how we can make it work.
Sounds great. Yeah, I'm happy to talk to you about that too. And it totally depends on, I feel like, how you want to go about it, but oftentimes my understanding is if it's under a certain value amount, like you can do certain things or whatever, and it doesn't have to go out, but it's also a competitive bid and it completely depends upon how you guys want to work it. So yeah, I look forward to it, and there's plenty of, it's never a bad thing to have things, the competitive bid process. I would say and this is just for general information, I've said this to numerous people, like if and when it actually goes like out to bid, just make sure that you have good qualifications of people, right? Because the work that certainly there's other people out there that could do the work for less than I would be able to, but they wouldn't necessarily be able to provide the straight native species or the knowledge.
I agree,
You know?
I agree 100%, and yeah, exactly, we wouldn't reach out to people that didn't have the expertise to be able to this type of planting, so.
Great.
But again, like you said, there's ways to break it up, and there may be some options for us, but I'll just keep that offline and talk to you early next week.
That sounds great. Yeah. Well, thank you all, and thank you, Trish, for pulling everybody together. It was great to just to do this, and look forward to hearing from you all.
Sounds good.
Thank
Okay.
you.
All right.
Thank you.
All right,
Thanks,
thank you all.
So I have a question
Okay,
about the grant.
yes.
Does the grant include maintenance money?
No,
No, that's not ever part of CPC grants. We might be able to think about other things for maintenance.
I'm maintaining it now. Any additional planting areas will make it easier because it's less. It should be less maintenance because once you let the native population grow, it wants to be growing wildly, so.
Well, this is a very exciting project, obviously. Maintenance is always more than you think. In the past, there's always been an issue with a bunch of kids that like to take things apart, and pull stuff up. A lot less now than in the past, that's for sure. Much better.
I think one of the things that we've learned over the years, that piece of property's been let to go to hell, but one of the things we know is that native plants are better for the environment and creating a thing that doesn't need to be maintained like a lot of non-native plants do. So I think that's part of the
And
deal.
the way they're gonna plant them is clusters. So you'll be able to maintain around them and you'll have access to them to be able to maintain the actual.
We're very
plants.
lucky that you are this enthusiastic. That I just want to say one more thing. As you can see from these photos, the place had no vegetation not too long ago, 40 years ago. So everything that's there now is invasive by definition, or it wouldn't be there. So I hope that there's some careful consideration for clearing other parts of this wild area.
So we've already moved on to Bailey's Hill. Have you been, when was the last time you were at Bailey's?
every day.
Okay.
And I'm,
You see the
as one thing
backside?
I'm quite concerned about,
You took
a number of reasons. I mean,
the amount of trees and vines and pruning we did back there was intense.
it totally intense, and I know that you've taken down, for example, this sumac. At least
Starting-
twice,
starting,
maybe 3 times. And I know one big area where it's been taken down, where the used to be shaded, is now sunlit. And there's poison ivy coming up like mad.
Mhm.
Because it didn't before, because it was shaded.
it's
So
all
I
part
am,
of the process.
I am not a tree hugger by nature. I'm married to an architect, everything has to be designed. Not a while, yeah, you won't find a garden full of trees. So I'm not against removing trees, but you know, it's basically a wild place out there in the outer hill. And maintenance can be overwhelming if you try to treat I can see clearing specified areas.
Yeah, so that's basically the
Just
idea. It's like,
limited specified area, let the rest of it go. I mean, Nahant is unique in having some wild places.
I
I
agree.
thought you were going the other way.
Too.
Right, me too.
You're saying it's invasive and you
Cut
should
it all
control
down.
it.
No,
Keep
I'm
control of it.
I'm sorry if I was misleading.
But
No.
I think that we also wanna, what we decide to let grow, we'd like to be more selective about, because those, if we.
We
put-
wouldn't.
We
there's
let
no
crap
way
just
we'd be
grow,
able
it's gonna
to-
blow back and see the rest of what we're trying to maintain.
But
We
it's
wouldn't be able to return it to what those pictures. What those pictures have it at, there's no way we would ever be able to return it to that condition.
Well, no, which picture? I mean,
Where you were showing like that there's not a lot of vegetation in those areas. The
Yeah,
other one,
we don't-
the more recent one.
I
you
mean-
showed. Yeah, that one there.
oh, well, no, I mean, that was 30 years ago.
Let me see.
No, now it's
Let me
the
see.
way it is. But
I went.
The top picture there.
Picture, see, yeah. Possibility.
You have to remember that Staghorn sumac is a native and a very valuable one, so just taking everything down, you know, not everything that's there is necessarily invasive. Staghorn sumac is like unbelievably, spreads really, really well. And is a native and valuable.
yeah, I mean, I would like to clear
You can't.
nothing on the outer hill. It's just, I mean,
So the idea there was to basically get all the dead life out, which we did.
But-
You can't have 500 years of dead life, so now
No.
we bought us time. And we bought me access to get in there, because if you let it go completely wild, the vines will kill all the trees,
the what?
the vines.
Vines will kill the trees.
So I've been, my goal has been to like save all these trees, and these trees that I've cut the vines out of are flourishing. When they were
Being
left for
strangled.
dead.
Yeah.
But I agree with keeping these areas wild, but we can do it. in a
Yeah, I mean,
way
the
that's
dead
super-
logs are where the insects grow and the birds need all of that. the
But he's
underbrush.
just like, that's gonna happen once he's cleared it away back
Right,
there.
so
I mean, it's a balance that has to get
Exactly.
over time.
If you're concerned about what we've done at Fort Ruckman happening at the outer hill. You don't have to be concerned about that, that's not gonna happen. It's a much more controlled. Reduction of dangerous trees, vines, dead stuff, you know, like bringing the trails back, leaving it more natural. Whereas Fort Ruckman slope is more of like a,
totally different issue.
yeah,
Natural
The Fort Knox-
landscape.
Completely different issue. It's a landscape planned, beautiful area. And you've done an incredible job, as everyone agrees. But I think there's a lot to be said for being careful about cutting too much more down on that outer
Oh,
hill
yeah.
and in what's left of Fort Ruckman. Because insect life and bird life need underbrush
I agree.
and, you know, to make sure that we are not losing huge numbers of species of insects and birds. And the special situation in Nahant where you can actually go somewhere and walk through a wooded area. that
That's what I
is
didn't want to lose.
Unique.
So-
And, you know, you.
Can I
It's-
also say that what you've taken down on the backside of the south slope, I've never been able to get to those places before,
Yeah.
because they were all like totally glommed in, and it's exciting to me to walk those places.
It's mostly trail focused.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
that area, it looks a little bit like we kind of went in, we did a lot, right? But.
And which
everything-
area are we talking about?
The south
outer
slope
hill.
that you're talking about,
Basically up behind the gazebo. So the coastal slope there.
You know,
and down the other
There
side.
were a lot of trees that were dead, leaned over, covered in vines, taking them out.
Walked in and there were all those
I guess
trees.
maybe I just don't have a good understanding of what it takes to have a healthy underbrush, which are important to preserving the insect species and birds and everything.
I think
So, yeah, it's
There
just-
will be many parts of Bailey's Hill where there will be lots
So
of
it's- The
underbrush.
process is to be able to go in and take these invasives out and then allow everything to come back. But just less of the invasives that are very aggressive, they block out views, they kill other things, stuff like that. So
And just remember, everything up there is invasive. Or it wouldn't be there.
Bayberry grows up there in hunks on that side. That's not an invasive, that's one of the things he's gonna plant.
The bayberry is great. But
But everything up there isn't invasive, and if we give those good things more space, it would be good. I mean, I just think it's a process and we just have.
the entry to Bailey's Hill at Tri Mountain Road could really need some.
we are working on
That's
it.
another area that, I mean, there's so many places.
Just he just pulled out all that old stuff, repointed and repainted the building, new roof.
Yeah.
So I agree though.
You gotta almost like remove everything before you can build what you want it to look like. So that's the process that we're in.
Like I said, that's like one of the things where I would go in and try to remove all the vines from the evergreens at the entrance. So in the fall, you'll see a person crawling underneath those. Snipping away, and hopefully the next spring they don't come back as.
I think,
I'm just literally walking through the woods, cutting vines, you'd never know I was there other than see. Vines cut, you know what I mean? So it's not like we're trying to destroy habitat, it's really just going in.
I also think we should think more about putting more evergreens on that other slope, because if
I
you look
know.
at both of them, tons of them are on the south slope, but the more northern slope has nothing.
That's what I
So-
was thinking,
Planting more evergreens, I think, would be really important over there to have a balance of evergreens but I just want to say one last thing, which was a lot of the plants that he talked about are a lot of the things that we have in our garden, the native gardens. So we know that they work here, even the people who have them right on the water, like the sweet fern and stuff like that. So that's really cool to us who have those gardens, because we know they grow here and they're happy here and they're gonna bring all the plants and the insects and stuff that we want as a start.
I have a question.
Satisfied?
Do we have access to this plan that he presented to us today?
I thought
Do you
we
mean
sent
his-
this to you.
You did,
Excuse
great.
me.
Thank
You
you.
mean his presentation that he gave today?
Yeah, the slides and the list and the charts and the maps and all that.
So there are two things. There's the actual plan that he wrote that's 22 pages long that I think you've already gotten by.
Yeah.
And then there's the presentation that he gave today, which I don't currently have. I did not get it before his presentation, but I certainly can ask him for
But
it.
it's totally
But it-
based on what he just wrote in the plan, so I'm
Exactly,
sorry.
that's what I was gonna say.
Yeah, it's
Very,
just-
very similar to the plan.
It's just so visual. I really like having the visual. Yeah, I think it's
We can
really
ask them.
So
valuable.
I will
We'll ask him
as,
for a copy of
yeah,
it.
I'll ask him for a copy and I'll send it around to people.
Yeah, Lynn
Okay.
sent me a text and asked if she could have a copy of it. That's why I was asking you.
Yeah, will do. All right, shall we call it a day?
Yeah, good idea.
Yes, thank you, everybody, for coming, for your
Thank
time, for your thoughts, for caring about all this.
And so we do have to submit this to these other companies. We do have to,
It depends on, it kind of
Depends-
depends on what the
depends on what
estimated
it
cost of the
costs.
project.
What do we have
is.
funding?
we have, yeah,
His proposal's 38,000.
right, but we upped that by 20% when we wrote the stuff, because that's what Lynn recommended.
Yeah,
So we're in between 10 and 50
Yeah.
at this point,
Yeah,
but we don't know what he's gonna come back with.
It's probably gonna be maybe a little sharper than that. But it's between 10 and 50, you have to reach out to 3 people. You don't
Right,
have to
right.
get quotes from,
Right,
correct.
You just have to solicit quotes.
you just have to ask. So,
okay,
I'll do that.
okay,
And I think you can talk to them, even if their number is high, you can talk to the other contractors to see if they'll adjust their number to the low bidder. And there's other ways to be able to select the person you want in this case.
okay,
There's also ways to break up the project into incremental parts, less than 10 grand, as long as they're
Was any of that
different jobs.
PPC money for signage?
yes, that's like, no, not for
No.
here.
Not for Bailey's.
What they talked about was having all of Bailey's Hill be signed at the same time, once we had more kind of work done on all the different areas. So we have no money for signage at this point. But,
Unless we sign a contract to get this plan implemented for less than 50, can we use the difference for signage? Was the original grant?
I think there was no signage
There's no
mentioned.
language in the
Right,
grant
right.
for signs at this
But I-
point. You know, we thought that was coming, but further down. the
But we
road.
also thought we're gonna need more grants in the future for these other areas to assist in other areas of Bailey's Hill, and we could certainly include that.
Okay.
And certainly see.
I just didn't know if we were trying to. Get him as low as possible so that we had money for other efforts like that.
But I think you have to have written about it in the grant,
You didn't,
But
yeah,
we
so if
didn't.
we didn't, then
right?
that's not
We also wanted to
necessary.
do some signs at Lodge Park and use that as a little test, to see how it worked and what we liked, and then use that to then inform signs at Bailey's Hill. So it's not in this project.
Okay,
I'd like to express my gratitude to Zach for all he's done. And all this collaboration. I know you spent enormous amounts of time.
all right, enough, guys,
No, positively, I need to say it. Hey, I need to say it. Thank you, Zach.
Thanks, bye.
Okay, on that note, all in favor of adjourning?
Aye,
Yay.
aye, aye.
Thank you, everybody. All right, if I can end it, so, end the meeting.